Well, welcome this morning to Coffee Conversations, our TCN webinar and podcast, where we have conversations and coffee. And I've got, for those who are watching, my Truett coffee mug here, a little soft plug this morning. We have conversations with thought leaders in ministry about challenges in ministry, stories of ministry to encourage, support, and equip pastors and churches. Our guests today are good friends of Truett. For those of you who are Truett alumni or students or connected in Texas Baptist life, they will be no stranger to you. To those in our network outside of Texas, these are men you should know and that we are all excited to learn from and hear from today. Dr. Levi Price was a longtime pastor at First Baptist El Paso, was the director of pastoral ministries and professor of practical theology and pastoral ministries here at Truett, retired a few years back. Currently is the interim pastor at First Baptist Clifton, just outside of Waco, up the road a little bit. Dr. Ron Cook recently retired a couple years ago. He was the director of the D-Min program, Doctor of Ministry program at Truett, the Old Testament professor at Truett, director of the W. Winford Moore Center for Ministry Effectiveness in his last post at Truett, and is now director of Arterios. If I get that right, Ron, did I say that right? Arterios. I knew when I said it, I didn't get it quite right. At First Baptist Woodway, which he may tell us a little bit about, is a 3-year training program for leaders and disciples in First Baptist Woodway. These men, for many of us who went to Truett, are our mentors and our friends, have been our confidants and mentors and friends through ministry for many years. And we're going to have the first conversation today of 3 over the next month, where we visit with Dr. Cook and Dr. Price about their ministry and really in hopes of encouraging those in pastoral ministry today, some of their stories and what they've learned and how they want to encourage us. So Dr. Cook, Dr. Price, thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Good to be with you. Yeah.
I could go on and on this, but I will say personally, and I'll just say it in this first one, and I won't burden you guys with this every time, how much you've meant to me personally in my life. Dr. Price, yours was literally the first class I took at Truett at 8 a.m., my first semester, Leadership for Ministry. And I remember so much from that, and you don't remember this, but I was a bleary-eyed 8 a.m., youth minister struggling in, and you caught me after class about 2/3 of the way through the semester and said, you can do this. You can be a pastor one day if you want to, and just really encouraged me. And that sunk in. It really did. And still gave probably the best advice I've ever been given in ministry is just don't be dumb. Just don't be dumb. You can get a lot of things done if you just don't be dumb. That's still quoted in the halls. And Dr. Cook has just been one of my great friends and mentors. As my wife, Kelly, and I look back on our life in ministry, there's just not many moves we've made or things we've done that didn't have Ron's fingerprints of guidance and good advice and wisdom somewhere there, and are just close personal friends with Ron and his family. And so it's just meaningful for me to have you guys on today and to have this conversation. And I know many others will enjoy it. Well, to get going, tell us a little bit about your call to ministry, how that call came to you. And where did you get started in ministry? How did you get started in ministry?
Matt, I'm gonna say this just starting out. The only reason I agreed to come on this is that you said you were going to have Levi, because I knew I could just say what Levi said and we would all be fine.
Careful.
So,
Yeah.
So I hope Levi will lead out here on this.
Well, I was a preacher's kid, and I actually think I had the calling to be a pastor while I was in high school. It's a long story. I'll make it brief. I decided later on in my life that I didn't want to be a pastor. My father was a pastor, and I saw things that happened to him, and I didn't want to be a pastor. And was outside that calling for many years. After I graduated from Baylor, I went out to California. My folks lived there then, and that was our home record then. Went out to California and worked for a contractor, big building contractor. And I remember I was on a job working, and my dad came out and followed me around all day long saying, you know, you need to follow the leadership of the Lord. And I said, I don't want to. Later on in my life, I went in the Marine Corps, and while I was in Vietnam, a chaplain witnessed to me. That's one of the reasons I appreciate military chaplains. Chaplain ministered to me, really called me back to commitment to Christ. And once I came back to commitment to Christ, I didn't do it while I was in Vietnam. I was about a year after I got back from Vietnam. I came back to commitment to Christ. And at that point, I began to deal with the call to ministry. And from there, well, as I said, it's a long story, but from there we went to Golden Gate Seminary out in California. That was our home record at that time. Went to Golden Gate Seminary. I didn't want to go to Southwestern. My dad had gone Southwestern. But my pastor in Maryland, where I was my last duty station, he wanted me to go to Southeastern. And that's all I wanted to do, was stay on the East Coast at that time in my life. So I ended up doing my seminary there at Golden Gate. Never been sorry about that. I felt like I got a really good education there. I was pleased with the education that I got. And that's pretty much, I don't know how far you want me to go.
No, that's great. That's great.
Why don't you?
What about you?
Well, you know, it's interesting just hearing Levi say this, and he didn't talk about years. But some of our experience may have overlapped. In California's, our family had moved. We're native Texan. We had moved to California when I was about to enter high school, and I started college at a community college mainly because of athletics, and I didn't know what to do with my life. And it was a time of great turbulence. Levi mentioned the Vietnam War. This was 1968, 1969, and it was a time of great turbulence in our country. And our campus was just embroiled and all of those in Southern and Northern California embroiled in campus protests. People today don't realize how volatile they were, you know, and how many threats there were, how many bombs went off, and that sort of thing. And I was really, you know, looking around, asking a lot of questions. You know, a young college student, and several things happened. And let me just mention them off kind of bullet point and kind of get to the point here. Martin Luther King died in the spring of 1968. And I had grown up in a family. My dad, I hope some of my cousins aren't watching this. My dad came from a really strongly racist family. I love my family. But he came along and he had a bent toward anti-racism, mainly because of the people he had gone through World War II with and other factors. And so we were raised to have great respect for people of other races, not only great respect, but deep love. My dad had been a coach, and he integrated a football team under great distress, I might say, in the 1950s. And so anyway, I stayed home and watched that entire funeral of Martin Luther King Jr., and I was overwhelmed with emotion. And I knew something was deeply wrong in this country, you know. And we live in a really broken world. A little later, Robert F. Kennedy died. He was the second of the Kennedy brothers. And I started being drawn to go down to Laguna Beach, California with my New Testament and read. I did it almost every day for, you know, outside of the sports times that I was in that summer, and began to ask the question, you know, and to say, you know, before God, you know, someone has to let people know there's a better way than this. And I got this real strong sense. I've never heard an audible voice in my life, but I heard something as clear as that. Well, yeah, you need to do that. I mean, and it had my name on it. I you know, I knew it was very personal. I knew that God had put a claim on me, and it was just as distinct. And then I ended up transferring to Baylor and going to seminary in Louisville with some of the people you just mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But it was that. And it, you know, I want to iterate, we live in a time of great turbulence. And I tell you what, God needs servants at a time like this. It's not a time to run away. It's a time to listen. And because the Lord is probably calling a number of good people to preach the gospel and minister in times like this.
Which is exactly why we asked that. I mean, it's just one of my favorite things to do is ask ministers, ask anybody really, what is your sense of calling and how did that come? And particularly if it's carried you over some decades, how that both grounded you and carried you forward. And we'll talk more about that over these next few conversations. And I'm learning more and more. There is no typical call story, is there? I mean, we kind of have some stereotypes perhaps, but they all come differently. They all come uniquely. They often come through others, that recognize giftedness in us before ourselves or in the midst of crisis and turmoil. And those are wonderful stories. So how did you both get started out? I mean, where you received that call, you both went to seminary, not in the training method, but how did you get started out serving? How did that look for you guys?
Okay, Rod, you get to go first this time.
Well, okay, if I go first, I'll make it fast. Levi knows the pastor ordained me, Brian Crow, and in California. And Brian immediately, once I told him I was called to ministry, he said, "You're my intern." And what that meant was gopher. I got to do a lot of little things around the church. You cannot overvalue just working alongside a pastor when you're young. So that's one thing. My first real church job, I was an assistant custodian. Now they wouldn't even, one of my friends in seminary was full-time custodian at the Christian Missionary Alliance Church in Louisville. I couldn't get a church because my wife didn't play the piano. And all the guys whose spouses played the piano got the churches. I knew guys who couldn't preach their way out of a paper bag who got churches. And I thought, look at that guy, Well, anyway, so I took a job as an assistant custodian, and it was at a church that had really high value and I fouled up as a custodian. And this old businessman one day said, you can do a good job if you want to. It had tremendous impact on me. To think that in the realm of church work that God wants our best. And then I won't go into detail in my first pastorate. I plunged way in over my head. I planted a church for the old Home Mission Board in Indianapolis because the placement director at Southern called me in, Dr. Larry McSwain, and he said, "Ron, I think I found a church that might call you." And I said, "Really? Why?" He said, "Well, they don't pay anything." So anyway, that was how, but we got Home Mission Board assistants, but I was way in over my head. And I would encourage anybody, if they have a chance to get into a ministry position of any kind that's bigger than they are, you have to learn fast. And I think that was very valuable.
I visited with one of our graduates yesterday who had served as a church secretary or assistant while in Truett and was talking about what incredible training that ended up being for pastoral ministry, how much they learned under a healthy pastor in a healthy place by what you would not really consider that as perhaps as a typical placement toward the pastorate. But so some of those non-typical jobs end up serving us quite well in there. But Levi, what about you?
Well, when I got to seminary, I wanted to preach. And so there was a vice president at the seminary that sent the guys out. Churches would call in and he would send them out. And I camped on his doorstep until he finally sent me out somewhere. And then he got a good report. So I got sent out several times after that. But when going to my first church, I had a classmate that called me in my first class in the morning and said, "Levi, would you go over here and preach with me? I was supposed to go here, and another church called and wanted me to come in view of a call." So I went over to that church and preached for him that Sunday. Actually, when I showed up, they thought I was he, and nobody realized who I was until I'd been there for a while. That church ended up calling me to be the pastor. Talk about in over your head. That was the church. I was the first part-time pastor, seminary student pastor that church had, but they'd gotten into tremendous financial trouble, and we may talk about this a little bit later. But got into tremendous financial trouble, and they had to go to a student pastor, and so that was my first pastor. I had also been working as a janitor, Ron. I was cleaning up the county attorney's office, making $105 a week. $105 a week. And this is 1969, y'all. So you get the picture here. And that church called me and they said, we'll pay you $100 a week. That sounded good to me to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I began being pastor. And for the rest of my seminary life, I was actually for 5 years, I was pastor of that church. Went through the master's program and also the D-Min program there, the class part of the program while I was there at that church. And just a couple of things, talk about being over your head, just the fact that they were not used to a full-time pastor and I was trying to do the job. But I'm not sure that's bad. Ron, you mentioned that. I'm not sure that's bad at all. That causes us to have to grow. And we lean on the Lord that way and lean on our friends and the people that could give us advice. So that's the way it started for me.
I feel a little left out. I've never had custodian or janitor as my title, but I will say as youth minister and senior pastor, I cleaned a lot of toilets and emptied a lot of trash cans and mopped a lot of floors. It was still part of the job description much of the time. I don't know if I've ever had a job, including today, where I didn't feel a little in over my head. That kind of feels like kind of a stock of the trade a little bit. Well, what do y'all remember in your early days of ministry as just particularly challenging? I mean, y'all mentioned being over your head, and this could be in those churches or just those first 10 or 15 years in congregational ministry. What do you remember as most challenging?
Levi's turn.
I sort of mentioned this earlier, but I went to this church that was in tremendous financial trouble. They'd actually had a preacher come in and steal $50,000 from them. And they were in a bond program. I need to explain this story. They were in a bond program, and they were also the renewal agency had bought them out downtown, and they moved out to the edge of town, and they took the money that should have gone into the bond sinking fund, and they were paying for the land. And so the state could have closed us down. We couldn't buy anything on credit. Even the Sunday school board would not give us material if we didn't send a check along with it, and so we were struggling, trying to figure out how to come out on top of that thing. And I got the people from the California Baptist Foundation, that one of them was a real mentor to me, and got them to help me. And we came up with a plan and went to the Home Mission Board. Nobody else would, farmers went to the Home Mission Board at that time and asked for, we needed $105,000 in order to refinance it. That just doesn't sound like anything now, but that was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
And the Home Mission Board came back and said, we don't give anything over $100,000. And I didn't know what to do. I'm a kid. I'd been to war, but I mean, didn't know ministry. And I went back to church and I said, we got to pray about this. And so we met for a week and prayed every day for a week. We met and prayed. And then every time we got together for anything, we prayed that God would help us. It wasn't that we weren't willing to pay the money. We just had to have a plan so we could get out so far over our heads that we could begin to deal with it. And sure enough, about 2 months later, the Home Mission Board came out with a new plan, and now they're gonna give financing up to $125,000. We were so moved that we thought God could even move the Home Mission Board. It was just, I cannot tell you what that meant to that church. But what it meant to me in my ministry is the difference prayer makes when a church gets together and they pray, and they seriously pray, and they know that there's no answer except what God can do. And that has probably affected my ministry from the early days. That's probably affected my ministry more than anything else, is the power of prayer. Everything that we have done in the ministry that I've been involved, we've included the prayer. And just to follow up that with just another word, if I may say, the last building program I was in El Paso. And somebody asked me if I learned anything that I'd use again. I said, I ain't going to do it again. But the first building, the last building was about 1995. And we began that thing with 40 days of prayer. Got this specialist to come in. He said, you don't have enough money. You can't raise enough money. I said, don't tell anybody. And sure enough, we not only raised the money, but we paid that building off before it was built.
Wow.
Mm,
And it was just
mm,
one of those powerful things. And so
mm.
I would say more than anything else in terms of my ministry, the power of a united prayer of a church
Mm.
is God responds to that. It's amazing.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
is, Levi, some of my stories different but similar when we had 40 or 50 people in our church leave over a 3 or 4 month period. And it just broke our spirit, or my spirit, and some of our key leaders, or it was about to. We were bending. We were bending to a point of breaking. And in January 3rd of that new year, after that had happened, 3 of us gathered together. I've not really done it exactly like this before or since. With a handful of deacons, we gathered and prayed for a day or half a day really of prayer and a full day together. And it changed the trajectory of our heart and our ministry in that church. I mean, we became a much different church centered on prayer, but we never could have got there if we hadn't gone through what we went through. It took that to create that understanding of need, I guess. But yeah, very similar. That's fascinating. Ron, what about you? What were some of your early challenges, and maybe Levi kind of took us there a second of what is some of those early days of ministry that you carried forward into the rest of your ministry?
Well, before I answer that, I mean, this is why I said what I did earlier. I mean, about Levi. We're living in a day in which technique and the new awareness of what church ought to be has kind of taken the new wave of how we do ministry. And Levi and you too have just said something. I mean, it's a work of God, and if it is not, we're pretty futile in what we do. So I just want to say my amen before I say anything to that. Um, uh, I ended up going to a church in Indianapolis, Indiana, 100 miles north of Louisville, and because they didn't pay anything. But anyway, there's a lot more to that. The Home Mission Board had a church had moved out of an inner city neighborhood, and Indiana Baptists wanted, it was a large population area. And many of the people there were transplanted people from the hills of Kentucky and Tennessee, and worked in factories. They'd moved north. And so we started a church, and it grew pretty fastest growing church I've ever pastored. But in my first deacons meeting, there was a sheet metal worker, there was a guy who worked in some kind of office, there was an old factory worker, and there was one other guy. And I said something about 10 minutes into the meeting, which I did early in ministry several times, that I had to learn and grow up a lot. But I said something that set this guy off. Now, C.W. Belcher was he grew up in the coal mines of Eastern Kentucky, and I hope I don't offend anybody. He had one eye looking at you and one eye hunting for you all the time. And when you try to look at him, you try to move around and see, where is this guy? And I said something that set him off, and he started walking around the room, and I could tell he was upset. To this day, I don't know what it was, but I think it was the way I responded to some of the things the deacons were talking about. And I wasn't really brash, but I wasn't respectful enough, I'm sure. He said, "Preacher, would you step outside?" And so we go out in the hall and go out in the backyard, and he has his hands on his hips and he's fuming around. And he said, "Preacher, you and I are going to disagree on a lot of things, I can tell." I thought, boy, this is a way to get started in my pastorate. And he looked at me and he said, I'd like to know that you and I could have a fist to skull fight out here and go back and be friends. And I almost stopped breathing. I thought, am I about to get in a fight here, or what's going on? What he was telling me was, you and I might have to step out and argue a few things out. But you know what? When we walked back in that room, he was fully supportive of me. He was communicating to me that, we're going to have to work through a lot of things, you and I. And we did. And I haven't ever had a deacon more helpful to me than that man was, because he didn't mind telling me when he thought I was wrong or when he disagreed with me. And then we'd pray about it and it was done. But here's the point: learning to love and respect and work with people who are really different from myself. That was an incredible gift from God. I tell you, learning to love and respect and work with those people just put a stamp on my ministry, and one that was needed. And I'll add one other little tag. learning to get things done with a limited amount of time. In seminary, I mean, you're if you're taking seminary seriously plus doing ministry, but wherever you are, I hear some people with these idyllic expressions of pastoral ministry, and I think, boy, you must have been like Eugene Peterson and been able to do it just like you wanted to. I think, maybe 3% of the people in ministry. And by the way, I used Eugene's book in class, but for most of us, it just doesn't work that way. And learning to use limited amounts of time to get things done was really important to me.
Have you read the new biography by Wynne Collier on Peterson, A Burning in My Bones? It's much more a biography, and it tells some of the rest of that story that's really good. It's a great companion to the pastor to tell a little more of the full story there. But yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. It elevates the pastor, I think, doesn't take away from it. But anyway, that's a little aside. That's neither here nor there. Well, I don't remember a ton from seminary. A lot of it sunk in, but I can't recall it, in a moment. But I remember very specifically in one of the classes I had with Dr. Price, Dr. Cook was the guest. And I have shared this with people. It sunk in when one of the things you shared, Ron, was, everybody gets to see the pastor's expertise and knowledge every Sunday. You get to go up there and the most about this or close to the most in your church, and you're prepared for it. That you need to get to see the practical geniuses, and you need to understand and let the people in your church show you what they're good at, what they love, and understand and appreciate who they are. And boy, that hit home. I took it to heart, and was one of the fun things of ministry is going and seeing people in their workplace and sitting down over lunch and coffee and understanding what gives them joy and what makes them tick, what motivates them, what they're good at, and what they have to offer the kingdom of God. And so y'all live that out, and y'all pass that along to a lot of us. And it certainly needs to continue being passed along. Appreciate those people and learn from them.
See, I was smart to have Ron in that class, right?
No, Levi, I teach life and work of the pastor now every fall. And when I have guests almost every week, and at the end of semester, when they give the reviews of the class, the guests are always the best part of the class. It's always the people that you bring in, which I try not to be hurt and take it personally, but I am smart enough to bring in smarter people, and that has its own thing. That was really well said, and so much to learn from in that. And Ron and Levi, what gets so much press right now, and it's true, is the division that our culture is facing. We already talked about some of the parallels between the late 60s and the cultural divisions and now, and lots being written and talked about that. And after COVID, we faced all this. But I firmly believe those people like that man are still in the church that you can disagree with, but still find ways to work together. There's others as well that don't want to work with you, that division is creeping, but there still are those people of peace that may be obstinate at time and may not get along well, but that we can work together peacefully. And boy, they are a great comfort, aren't they? That we can do that.
Yeah, the people who disagree with you to your face are usually not your enemy.
That's right. Yeah, there's a big difference there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, as kind of a last question to visit about, to speak to those in ministry now, it's a hard time to be pastoring. We talked about that before we went live today. And then we got a whole crop of people entering ministry, many of whom have joined their church, have been serving their churches over a year in pandemic. They don't know their church other than in pandemic, which is such a hard way to do it. You get to know your people in crisis, and you're going to have to learn to know them in peacetime, which generally that works the opposite. What encouragement would you give, just as you view the early years of ministry? What encouragement would you give young ministers today?
It's Levi's turn.
This one I really thought about. I think I would maybe suggest 5 things if I may do that. I'm not going to preach a sermon on these 5. But the first one is don't do dumb stuff. And y'all expect to hear that from me. But I cannot tell you how many of my former students have said that's the one thing I remember that you said is don't be dumb. I'm convinced that most of the problems that pastors get into, both young and old, is by doing dumb stuff. I'm just strongly convinced of that. And I take my reference there from Ephesians 5, where it says, be not unwise, but wise. Understand what the will of the Lord is. So, that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is the responsibility that's involved in being a pastor is we take on an incredible responsibility. I've been reading in my daily Bible readings about King Saul. And if you go back, and I don't have to tell Dr. Cook this, he's an Old Testament scholar. He's the one I asked for information about Old Testament. But go back to the story of King Saul, the early part of his life is a beautiful story. It's one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible. But he was not responsible himself. And we got so many pastors nowadays that, you read the paper, it seems like Christianity Today or something, it seems like every month you read something, somebody's fallen in one way or another. So taking the responsibility seriously. Third thing is compassion. I don't care what you say, you cannot be a pastor if you don't love people. You just cannot be a pastor if you don't love people. And you've got to love the people. I am a personal example to say that there are times when I haven't loved people. I've prayed that God would give me love for people, and without fail, God has given me love for those people. And I'm not kidding. I'm very serious about that. And so compassion is really important. The last thing that I would suggest to you is important is keeping up your personal devotional life. It's so easy to get involved with seminary, so easy to get involved with the church, and particularly when you're in seminary and doing church ministry too, that you don't have time for that. And then you get out in the ministry and you've already created a pattern of not having time for it. But it's just really vital, in my opinion, to have your personal time with God every day. And there's just not anything that will take the place of, and I know I'm saying things that have been said 100 times before, but I'm saying it from my own experience. I've learned this, that you need your personal time with God and personal worship with God every day. You just really need that.
Well, friends that are watching, we had a computer glitch as is happened. So you will see my background has changed. But Dr. Price had just finished sharing some of his encouragement to young pastors, and we had to make a quick change. And so, Ron, help us finish up well. What would your encouragement be to young ministers?
Well, I had just told Levi that I was about to step in alongside what he said there on some of that, because I really do think that that God gives a love for the people along with the calling. In fact, I think that is so important for God to develop a deep love for God's people. And and I'll echo just what Levi said. Sometimes he has to give it to you because it's not easy. I'm not easy to love. In fact, when I do interim pastors, the first thing I do is form the GLOP Club, GLOP, God Loves Honorary People. And I declare myself president. And I said, I'm on the lookout for the honoriest people in this congregation, and I'm going to put you in this club. I learned a long time ago to get them up close to you if you could. So,
that may be worth the price of admission right there. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I don't, the GLOP Club. Well, and I had to learn the hard way. I mean, early in my ministry, thanks be to God, the last time I told somebody I was going to kick their, I had to learn anyway. God's had to do a work on me, believe me. And I have this mild-mannered part of me, but I got this Irish temper that I've had to deal with all my life. So, but anyway, the love of the people, I along that line, I think what I would say in terms of encouragement, I think most people really want to love their pastor. I really do. I think the vast majority in the church really want to, and it's that's not an easy thing, but I think it's important to remember that, because it's easy to look the other way and think, well, so and so is upset with me, and to get obsessed about a few. And I think when it finally took on me, that I realized most of the people really did want to love me as their pastor and could focus more on that. It really made a change of perspective. And I say that by way of encouragement, because I think our human nature is such that it's easy to focus on criticism. When I see mature pastors that are still reacting too strongly to criticism, I think, what Levi said a while ago about the spiritual life, I really think, boy, there needs to be some work there. And I say that by way of testimony,
Yeah.
that I knew at those times when I was reactive or whatever, that I needed to do some personal devotional work. And I'll just say one other thing. And this is a kind of a difficult to say, and I'm not the best at words on this, but we really, when God calls us to the ministry and puts us in a pastoral position, we really are an occasion for God to work. We're one of the best opportunities God has. He works through people, and he works powerfully and significantly through pastors and ministers, leaders of congregations. I mean, that's an occasion for God to be at work. And I tell you, it is such a deep, deep privilege. The pastoral life is a magnificent life in that sense. It is a work of God, if God is at work. And even with our failure in humanity, and I would say that by way of encouragement, that you can talk all you want to about the hardships and the difficulties and running away from those, and I think if we talk later, we may talk about resilience. But I think, to really realize that God is at work through our life for the sake of his church, the body of Christ, which is so precious to God. And he's at work using us to bring wholeness and health through what he can do, through us. And we're not the be all and end all, and it's not about us. And I put emphasis on that occasion for God, that, we just, my philosophy of ministry is that I adopted from an old turpentine farmer in Georgia. When he said to me, "Preacher, all we do is give God a chance to work. That's all we do." Mm. And we are occasions and anything we do is an occasion for God to be at work. And I think I say that by way of encouragement. It's, there's a magnificence about that I don't know that exists in anything else I know of. And there are a lot of other wonderful things that people can do, but to be called into that is, looking back, it just grows in its magnificence. When I look, and I think it's one of the reasons I love pastors, and I really do. I just think I look and I think, man, these are magnificent. Not, they may be limited. I know their weaknesses and whatever, but look at what God's doing through this person. And it just, it's an immense privilege. So.
And that's a good word. And I hope for those that are watching and listening, that's a great encouragement. In the midst of whatever you may be facing, Pastor, in any given day, in any given hour or season, to give that word of the magnificence of this calling, and to give God room to work, being about that. That's a pretty good philosophy of ministry right there. But well, Ron and Levi, thank you so much for today. Again, if you're watching, following today, we're going to have a couple more conversations on developing, on how Levi and Ron have faced conflict through the years and dealt with conflict, but also how resiliency is formed through conflict and crisis and other things. And then a third conversation on transitions in ministry, and then the last stage of ministry. How do you know it's time to retire? And then what has kept these guys so bad at retirement, where they keep coming out of it and taking on other ministry positions, how they've remained loving of ministry in the church through their ministry. So we'll be having one of these each of the next few weeks. But Ron and Levi, thanks for the conversation today. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.